I went in the long way.
All right, the hangout is live. Don't everybody sit in the back. Sit up front. I'm serious.
Move forward.
Just because they're move forward. Move forward. I know we should rope these chairs off. Don't allow people to sit in the back. You can't hide. See, this is good. Good. Nothing coming through there.
That was easy.
Yeah, we did. Jeff and I checked that before. What are you looking at? That's what I'm feeding right now, but I have that. And I'm feeding his thing. We're good. In. What do you mean? He's
Just
connected.
through your
He's another guest in the Hangout, and he does a screen share. So rather than running it through here and down converting the video, we get a nice clean HD through there.
Okay, through the second share.
Through the second share. That's why we always try to get the slides in advance, to do stuff like that.
Okay, cool. I mean, this is dark.
No, it's not dark.
Here?
It looks kind of. I think it's a little blue.
On one or two?
On
On that one up there?
Maybe just flip the switch.
Yep.
We're helping.
Does anybody need the guest Wi-Fi? Yeah, it's yeah. I was looking for a Hopefully, we have some music fans in the crowd, because then I'll tell you what. Is GS a guest?
So in terms of like time, you have like a certain year.
Yeah, it's pretty tight. It's about 45 minutes. Machine learning. Capital U, Nick? Capital U or lowercase?
I think it's
Lowercase.
Yeah, I mean, if you're okay going to use it, actually.
Yeah. Anyone? Anyone?
Music fans?
Okay, you ready, Nick? All right, go to it. Remind people hashtag 18F Live.
Cool.
See how far forward I can get with this thing. Cool. All right, you good, Ori? Cool. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. This is our, what is this month? June, our June 18F Design Speaker Series event. And Thomas Vander Wal has been very kind to come and speak to us. He is an expert information architect and in a lot of things digital media and social collaboration. So he's going to talk today about internal social and collaboration and tools. I also wanted to mention that perhaps best known for coining the term folksonomy. And Thomas also used to be a federal employee as well. You're a contractor. Okay. In the federal government, doing work for DOT back in 1999, you mentioned, on liberating some data sets in a way that was very, very far ahead of its time, and not even just for government. So some very cool work. Thank you very much for doing this and being with us. Please welcome Thomas.
Thank you. Today I'm going to be talking about the magic of internal social and collaboration, and essentially talk about sort of what it is, how the internal is different from the external, the social web and social media. Then talk about setting foundations, how to start getting it right, things to look out for, and then essentially how to review and how to select tools and so forth, either for yourselves or being able to help others who are going down that path. Quick overview of who is Thomas. So going back to 1996, a year out of grad school in public policy at Georgetown, I got a job with a legal trade association with 3,000 attorneys who were on a CompuServe private forum. And managing 3,000 attorneys on anything, and where there was 3 different subsets and they didn't agree. I learned an awful lot about social very quickly, and I started using an awful lot of my understanding in social sciences, from public policy, from economics to social analytics, and being able to understand how groups flow, cultures flow, understanding, is it the person, is it the culture, is it their framing of things, is it the tool? And you have this weaving of things, and you're trying to pull the threads to tighten it and not have it all fall apart. In 2002, I had sort of stumbled into this idea of the model of attraction through a discussion with Stuart Butterfield, who is now head of Slack. Prior to that, he was Flickr. Prior to that, he was making game. Prior to that, he was in grad school in philosophy, getting a PhD in philosophy. And it was during that time he and I got into a late night discussion about the creation of the term information space and what it meant. We had 2 completely different founding points. But at the end of the discussion over a Thanksgiving weekend, he's like, all I'm trying to point out is navigation's the wrong metaphor for everything we do on the web. And I was like, oh yeah, completely agree. And everybody else that was following the discussion said, yeah, we agree as well, but what do we turn it into? So the following year in 2002, I was at South by Southwest, and having my mind blown by Joshua Davis, a Flash artist, designer, having magnetic bees chasing each other around on the screen and changing the polarity and the attraction on them. And I walk out of that, and Stuart walks by, and I'm like, oh, we've never discussed, and found something that replaces navigation. And it's like, oh, what about attraction? I was thinking in my head, and I'm like, oh, you drop a term into Google or another search engine, and you're attracting those terms to the screen. And very much like dropping a catalyst into a beaker with solution, everything starts glomming onto it, and the things that aren't related start falling away, so you have clarity of seeing what's related. And when you start clicking things on a screen, what you're doing on the screen, you're clicking on a term, trying to bring those things to your screen. And in 2002, started thinking, wow, this makes a whole lot more sense. And I'd already had 2 years of doing mobile development and mobile design. I'm like, wow, this really helps me think about the bandwidth, the processing power, the screen size, all these things that we haven't been thinking about that are primary things to think about. And it's like, oh, and I grabbed Stuart, I grabbed like 5 or 6 other friends, talked about it, had a flight in about 3 hours later, and wrote a 3,000 to 4,000 word essay on model of attraction. And that became my foundation for almost everything after that, because it also allowed you to think about, when I find things I'm attracted to, how do I have them, keep them attracted and have them follow me in the sort of rough cloud of information? So we hit that technical nirvana of when you want and need things, it's at your fingertips. And that essentially, that rough cloud of information within a couple of weeks turned into the personal info cloud. 2004, accidentally coined the term folksonomy. It was an IA private forum and discussing what made Delicious and Flickr, their tagging different from the tagging that was going on and had been going on for many years. And the thing that separated it was regular folks were being able to tag things and put things in their own vocabulary for their own retrieval, and it held out who had tagged things. So understanding who had tagged something, the term that's being used around the object, allowed you to be able to build synonym repositories and do all these incredibly smart things, and having an emergent taxonomy over time that were just never possible before. And so I just threw the term out there to get the discussion going rather than naming the darn thing. Within the IA and UX field, there's an awful lot of naming the darn thing. Been told to keep this clean. I'm keeping it as clean as possible. And 2004 also came up with the term, the come to me web, around the Web 2.0 framework, and also the model of attraction. So rather than being the I go get web, we had the come to me web. And we weren't going to other people's sites that were framed by what they called things, how they thought about things. Delicious and things along those nature allowed us to find and use things in our own vocabularies. And we started being able to think about things within a mobile framework, taking things, removing them from their screen, and being able to put them in context in people's lives. So it was framing things around that for quite a while. And then in 2008, an awful lot of the work that I'd been doing around social, I started breaking things down and using all these little small models that I had that I was using with clients and vendors and people making social software, and breaking things down and started sharing those out and linking them together. And very quickly, I thought I only had 6 or 7. Within a couple of weeks, I had 20 some. Within about a month, I realized I had about 40. And over the last few years, it's now up over 60 of these small lenses that you're able to use to see complexity in the small pieces and complexity and see them clearly, and have those aha moments and go, oh yeah, no duh, this is the way it works. We can't see this because we've got all these other things that are coming in, these other 7 or 8 priorities, so we can't see clearly what the problems are, so we can design and develop for them much better. In 2010, got into a discussion with Dave Gray, who I walked through all 40 of the social lenses, and giving deep explanation and giving feedback. And it took about 4 days to go through all 40 of them. And out of that came the Connected Company, which turned into us doing some workshops together, speaking together, and then the Connected Company book. And because of copyright and neither Dave or I owning it, and the company that Dave worked for owned the copyright, I have no actual words in there. And a lot of my intellectual property is sort of fuzzy within it, but I mentored him through it. And a lot of the ideas are there, but I still have the social lenses that are the foundation for Connected Company. I still have those, and I'm free to use those, and I'm not, nobody else has ownership on them. But within the social lenses, one of the things that it helped me do and helped me see was the internal social and collaboration much better, being able to look at situations. And quite often I'll get calls or emails from people saying, hey, we're really stuck. We don't know which way to go. We've got the best in class platform. We have some other things. It's just not functioning. We've got a community manager, and we think we may have the wrong tools. And so use the social lenses, usually in a half-day or full-day workshop, walk them through the social lenses, and they start seeing things differently, and the aha moments start happening. And so I've got 3 of the social lenses within this. So the why of the internal social and collaboration. And so essentially we start out with just having connected workspaces. You can be anywhere, and being able to have a conversation, share work, share ideas. In 2004, was having a conversation with one of the directors at Sun. And they had just started to move away from having a requirement for everybody to be on one of their business campuses and be on their main campus. And they're like, yeah, well, you can be in any of the satellite offices, or even amazingly, you can work from home and still be connected and work. And one of the things that they found out is that all these hallway conversations and all these bright ideas that happened away from a desk, away from a computer, that weren't captured, were magically being captured. The hallways had memory. And you could have these conversations about great ideas that you'd forget by the time you get back to your desk, because you looked at your desk and your desktop, and you'd only been away for 30 minutes, and you have 45 new emails that are all marked as high priority. And you're just like, crud, I got to get all this other stuff done. And I'm like, wait, what was that great idea? And so this idea of having hallways with memory was absolutely brilliant. And I'd been playing around with not only CompuServe stuff and spending a lot of time with CompuServe product folks and trying to fill in some of the gaps and make it easier, but had been reading John Udell's book about groupware, which came out from O'Reilly in '92. was all written in Perl, and I was taking the Perl and converting it to PHP in sort of the mid-90s, and sort of cobbling together groupware with it. Another thing that's really valuable is that the knowledge sharing is captured, and it's very easy. People are being able to ask a question, people share their feedback, you're able to highlight and find things, and it also embraces working out loud. So you're able to ask questions out loud, the answers are captured because people are working out loud and other people are able to benefit from it. So if one person has a question, more often than not, many people have the question, and it just makes it much easier and much more efficient to be working this way. One of the things we really need to understand when we're going through this is understanding knowledge flows and information flows. And traditionally, for the last 20 to 30 years, we've been basing everything on email. And email is not the most efficient way of doing this, because email is essentially where knowledge goes to die. If you think about every email that is in your email application in Outlook or whatever you're using, think of it as a tombstone, because whatever is in there is dead. When you bring somebody new onto a project, they can't get to it. They can't get to that dead knowledge. They can't get to that thing. They can't see the history. You have to spend all this time preparing things rather than using something like Slack or another messaging service with history and being able to search or to pin things. Here are the 20 things that you need to know about this project over time. People have a fresh start, and they can click on that one piece and bring it up in conversation and in context. That's absolutely brilliant. And being able to do that, and I've been working with social platforms that allow that over years. And within large enterprise and business, the last 5 to 8 years, the #2 application that is widely used within organizations after email, being the #1, is Link in most organizations. And most organizations do not store, do not retain anything that happens in Link because they say it takes up too much memory and too much storage space. So all these smart things are shared, but the advantage of having these digital spaces, the memory, hallways with memory is completely lost. And so email is essentially a closed node. It's sort of the I-go-get world of enterprise and large organizations. And so the old nodes are essentially framed by being top-down. They're approval-centric. They're slow to spread, slow to change. Knowledge is buried within them. Search is usually really poor. The links aren't there to interlink related elements. And they're training focused. If you have a problem, you get a 3-ring binder put on an airplane and get sent to 3 days of training to figure out how to use this tool that was bought because it was intuitive and easy to understand. It doesn't work that way, or didn't work that way. Email is one of the things that is a closed node. People share things within it, but it's only those who are shared. It doesn't really expand. It doesn't think about the future and future uses. It's only thinking about the current and the past and what is dead. It's also document repository centric, with white papers and policy documents, sort of the endpoints of all of this work. And essentially, those are dead documents because as soon as they're released, they start getting out of date the second after they're released because things change, everything is moving. And we start countering that with open nodes. So the open node world is emergent. As things are changing, it emerges along with it. It's sharing centric, it's nimble and adaptive. If somebody has a new need, you can just pop up a group within it, start sharing information, capturing what's needed. It embraces things that are constantly changing, and it is constantly changing and keeping up, particularly within in a cloud environment where it's always being updated. You don't have to wait 6 months to update it, and because you need to take the system down for 24 hours to do the final updates, it's happening as you move along. Knowledge is searchable and linked, which is insanely valuable. And as people are linking things, that makes search even better. When somebody is explaining, oh yeah, the answer to that's in this piece over here, and you're able to link directly to it and it hasn't been linked to before, all of a sudden search now can follow that link and it can find the information. Wow, people can find it in search. It becomes magical. It's also helping focused rather than training focused. Somebody has a question, hey, how do I do this? I saw somebody do this the other day. People are able to answer it. It gets marked, gets linked to where the FAQs are, other background information, and people start learning emergently and a little bit more freely rather than going through the training. It's open digital conversations, and the digital means that it's searchable, connectable, linkable. It's collective and collaborative living documents. And the living documents rather than the dead documents is important. So as something is published and put, having annotations and edits and other things being updated, it may not change the actual version, but you know that things are changing and saying, oh, these 2 paragraphs here, these are going to need to be changed. There was a ruling somewhere. We need to hold on to this. And you can see that happening live. And all the history and transitions are viewable and available. So you can go back and see how things are done. I'll get to why that's important next. And conversations around the objects and links to the objects, with the objects often in clear sight, essentially the social object. That is incredibly valuable because people aren't having a conversation over here about something over here. They're brought together. You can see the conversations happening. You can see whether it's a law, if it's an intersection that needs to be upgraded, if whatever it is, it can be a photo, a video, whatever it is, the conversation's happening around it, and you have a clear idea of what's being talked about, not something that is far more abstract. And all this is important because in the long run, what went into making the decisions has far more value and is far more important than the decision itself. That white paper and that output is dead and out of date as soon as it is released. But if you're able to go back and say we had 5 options for this one piece of it, we went with option C, and as soon as it's out and running, you start saying, wow, the live data and the uses are completely different than our expectations. It looks like D and a little bit of E could be better. You don't have to go back and rework all of that. All of that information is captured, and the decision points why you did and didn't use it, they're all always there and available. So you can go back and it becomes about 2 weeks of work to go through and map out how to change to D and a little bit of E, rather than a 6-month effort of going back and redoing the research, rethinking about it. It's a 2-week effort to frame it, 2-week effort to iterate it, a day or 2 to launch it, and it's much faster and far more efficient. And we start working that way, working in any other way becomes really painful. The difference between the external social and the internal is somewhat large. And an awful lot of organizations, and it's usually where I start getting calls and asked for help, is because they're completely different things. They're completely different understandings and frameworks. So with the external, what we have is something with a success rate of something a little bit greater than 10% of customers that are active and using a social media campaign and using something is considered to be great success. 10 to 15% is usually really, really good. So if you've got 100,000 people and 10,000 people are responding and liking something on Facebook, 10,000 people is huge. If you've got 1 million people and 100,000 likes and 100,000 people in a community is huge. It's small compared to 1 million, but it's huge when you're sitting there and like, wow, job well done. And that 10% is incredibly valuable and like huge success. Internally, it's a completely different metric. That metric is 100%. And quite often people are thinking, yeah, we've got 15 to 20% over 6 months using our internal platform. And you're like, wow, you're way ahead of the success rate for the external social media campaigns. Aren't you proud of yourself? And they're like, no, we want to be like email. And what we forget about is email took essentially 5 years or more to get to roughly 99%. In an awful lot of organizations, it took about 10 years to get to 90%. And I know chunks of organizations today that you have like 3 to 4% of the organization still isn't using email. This is 2015, people not using email. Begins to be a little bit crazy. Also, the social web often focuses still on the edge cases, the early adopters, the innovators, and it's not the mainstream. A lot of what Clay Shirky was writing about and just sort of how the web has changed and the social media had changed the way the whole world works and the whole way everything works. He was basing it on us, those of us who were really early adopters, those who were in the first 2,000, 10,000 on Twitter. I've got an 80 on Foursquare. I'm like the 80th user of Foursquare. I had it 3 days before anybody else had it because I knew others. And almost all the services that I have, I'm like in the first 5,000 of all the big things. And it's like we were getting written about how this was changing the world, but we work very differently than everybody else. We're not only outliers, we're completely broken people. We think about things in drastically different ways. And so how the normal people work and the mainstream works is drastically different. And you have to embrace that and understand that from the internal social platforms and the internal collaboration platforms. So what our big job is essentially understanding how the other 90% are social. And it takes an awful lot of skills to be able to do that, but it also takes an understanding of sort of the every now. And the every now is a term that I started using a few years ago that is an expression of the breadth and the spectrum of the gap implied by William Gibson's statement, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And you still run into people that are thinking, wow, I just got a fax machine. How magical is it that I can put a piece of paper in with text or a drawing and it shows up somewhere else in the globe on paper and exactly the same way that I put it in or close enough. And that for them is magical. And they're like, wow, we're able to do this with digital text. And, you know, and I'm like, that's the magic, mind-blowing world. And people are still coming to fax. And being able to say, you know, this is 2015, I finally got a fax machine. I'm in the modern current world. And so the every now is a concept we really have to understand for designing, developing, you know, choosing tools, implementing, and managing these systems. And it helps us understand sort of the breadth and the gaps and the diversity of the mental models that people have. People may not understand what starring something is or favoriting things. I've got 7 core intents that people have with starring something in Twitter. And that star gets brought over into enterprise and large organization tools. And I know 2 organizations that have fired people over starring something. Not because they started, but because the interpretation was wrong and they started taking actions and thinking it was a sign-off and approval, rather than the person going, oh, I need to hold on to this for later. Let me just start and I can find the things that I've starred and favorited. I don't have time right now. I need about 6 weeks. When I clear this project, I'll look at it and give some feedback. And they thought it was approval, and they went ahead after 2 weeks, and people were so proud of themselves because after 2 weeks they got full sign-off. Yeah. Yeah, on Twitter. So like the Twitter star and favorite, but it shows up in everything. And it's not understood. And I've worked with an awful lot of vendors, and I'm like, oh, let me guess, you have an awful lot of problems around starring things. They're like, yeah, there's all sorts of confusion. I'm like, well, yeah, there's an awful lot of different intents for it, and people are intending one thing and it's being interpreted differently. And also being able to understand what's current and modern in the technologies and what are people comfortable with. An awful lot of people aren't comfortable with being openly social. And that's something that takes an awful lot of work. So as we start thinking about these things and start framing things, we need to start getting the foundations right. We don't want to have the floor start falling away underneath us. We want to have a good foundation, being able to build on top of that foundation and move forward. And the first thing that we need to do is understand sort of the who and the where in social inside an organization. So the first one with the where is it just going to be internal? And if it's just internal, that makes it a lot easier. The rules are much easier to deal with. An awful lot of times you have compliance, what can be shared, who shared who, what with whom. And it is a much easier platform. But sometimes we also need to work with our trusted partners. Could be contractors who are outside, could be scientists who are providing review and expert insight. And then there's sort of the external citizens. And being able to have access for them. A project that I had done that was mentioned earlier in '99, started in '99 to take all the data that DOT captured, make it available on the web as searchable, but not only searchable, we were enabled to mix, match, and marry all the variables from all the different data sets on the fly, being able to do lightweight quantitative analytics on the website, on the fly, and be able to allow scientists and as well as students down to high school level, junior high level, to be able to figure out how many stop signs they had in their county, how many the next county had, what were federally funded stop signs, which ones weren't, and to be able to do that easily on the website, as well as a full GIS and mapping application. And in '99, 2000, we were told it was technically not possible. And I kept on writing pieces of it and building pieces and putting it out. Yes?
Sorry, you're talking about so stop and federal stop signs, please explain that, and how do you distinguish trusted partners from external citizens? Thanks.
Okay, with the...
It would seem like citizens are trusted partners since they're communicating with higher enterprise.
So the trusted partners are people like scientists, others who the government needs their feedback, not open up to, and it's also contractors who are working on the same project. which is different than citizens who are interested in what's going on from the outside and looking at the end result of something, not something as it's being built. And so the trusted partners, you need to be able to look at the budgets, you need to be look at everything as it's happening. They have secure access to the same documents and so forth. And then,
Back to that, it's not a mere
Can I make a request? If you're going to ask questions, please use the microphone.
yeah. And also I can hold the questions to the end because it's,
Resource Center. So my primary questions are, you alluded to citizens as having a mere interest, but in fact, you know, there's accountability that's not happening if they're not being able to watch the finances, which is what you pointed to.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure why that's secure behind a wall or trusted partners versus not trusted. I mean, that's what the implication is. But more importantly, the federal stop sign, if you could just explain that a little bit.
so one of the things that's in DOT information is which stop signs are federally funded in a county.
Real sign, not
Yeah.
metaphor.
Yeah. So we had all this data, and you could take federal, you know, one of the things that we're using for our dog and pony was a railway where a car gets hit by a train, and being able to look at the accident data, which covers 3 different operating administrations within Department of Transportation. Being able to take that data, see where all of those are, being able to map it, being able to normalize the data and work with it with germane variables at the same time. And the thing that we didn't, get right, and we kept on pointing out, was that there was privacy data and all this data hadn't been cleaned. It had been signed off as it had been cleaned, but the way that things were in the 90s was you signed it off as it's been cleaned when you handed it to somebody else to clean it. The government didn't clean it. It was usually handed off to somebody else. And so they're like, oh, we've given the same data that you're getting is the same that we're handing off externally. And I'm like, this is a social security number. This is the home phone number for somebody responsible for a gas pipeline leak. This is a social security number for somebody killed in a boating accident, and the name and social security number for the person responsible. And they're like, no, it can't be because it's been signed off. And so as soon as it went live, 6 hours later, it came down, and it became an only internal application for folks within the government, and it was up till 2008, 2009. But the external citizens, so people who are developing code, developing security mechanisms, that's not going to be open to citizens. They're looking at essentially the end applications. And as things are being built, you need to have the contractors and federal workers being able to work on something, folks at NIH working with experts in universities, being able to have conversations going back and forth, may or may not be open to citizens. But there's 3 different classes of, actually there's 7 different steps and 7 different depths in most social, that are potential for most platforms. Most platforms only have 2 or 3 different settings. And most often, the easiest one is just having internal social platform. Federated and integrated platforms with trusted partners is a little bit more complex. But as you scale, and you have certain people being able to log in and access, that just becomes a nightmare to start managing, and it takes an awful lot of planning and understanding. Completely different from the external citizens and what sort of open, what's capable and what's not. And so as we're understanding sort of the who and the where, who's going to be using our systems, we also have to start thinking about the team that's going to be building it and making the selection. And I've got 14 different roles that are essential for social software. And I call it the money ball of social software. Because if you want to win and have success, you need to have these 14 roles. Most organizations only have 1, which is IT and integrators. And I've got 7 of the 14 here that are sort of the big ones that to pay attention to. The first is a community manager, who is essentially the person who is overseeing the system, but is also the person who sits between the people using the collaboration, the social platforms, and the tool itself. They're the one who will set sort of the framework for the activities that are going on, getting people engaged, getting people using things, helping people understand what's not working for them, and moving things forward. The next is the social interaction designer, which is slightly different than the interaction designer, who is building something for humans to interact with the tool itself. And when the human clicks on something, they know what it's going to do, and it's a back and forth. The social interaction designer goes from the human through the tool and have somebody understand it, understands humans on the other side and social and cultural differences, and starts building affordances for the differences between these. So they have a good understanding of sort of how humans are social, and social through a mediated construct. And it becomes a drastically different and much more complex understanding, and understanding where the problems may lay or lie. Typing is much easier because it will correct it for you. Speaking is a little more difficult. But when you have that set up, that human to human through communication, it's just like the people favoriting things, and one person thinks that it's an approval, the other person's thinking, oh, I'm just holding on to this. Somebody else could be looking, oh, Thomas is favorited to something, he must like this. I'm just using that favorite as something for another tool to come along, scrape it and pull it into another pool and archive it and make it fully searchable for me. And so there's all these different intents, and being able to understand those, have the affordance, and being able to do that well takes a special class of interaction designer. The next is having social scientists, and particularly ones that are sort of at a master's degree, because you start seeing things vastly differently. You start seeing the lay of the land, you start seeing cultural differences and organizational differences pop out at you. And some of the questions that are asked are just not asked and not even thought of by people who don't have that background. And so they're essentially invaluable for selecting tools, watching as the services are moving along, and seeing how things are progressing. Having a knowledge manager is incredibly valuable as well, because essentially you're capturing knowledge, being able to figure out how to capture the knowledge, how to store it, how to interlink it, how to resurface it and repurpose it. It's something that an awful lot of tools don't do well, and it takes humans to be able to sort of see things and map things and look at how to augment the tools to better handle that. Also being able to have UX folks and UX research folks, so that they're able to test as you're iterating through things. You're like, hey, we've had 40% of people aren't using a tool or using this functionality. We've made some updates to it. We need to test it. We need to look at the research and be able to move things forward. And so having UX folks involved is insanely valuable. Also being able to have a change manager, because one of the things that changes when you have these tools in place is that the organization changes. And quite often managers will go, we need to have this thing ripped out because our middle managers feel like they've lost all their power, or all these other things are happening. People aren't comfortable with the change that's happening with the tools around them, and it's completely changed how processes and people are working. So having a change management person involved very early on and saying, here's how things may change, being able to walk people through and get them prepared for what's going to happen and the values that are going to be derived by having these in place is important to have up front. And oh yeah, the IT dev and integrators, those are important as well.
And so it's
When you start looking at systems that only have just the IT dev and the integrators, there's other ways that you can get these pieces, and sometimes it's by buying products that have, the vendors have put an awful lot of time and they're doing right fitting by having these. But more often than not, you need to have these and the other 7, which include communication managers, blanking. I've got the list, and then one of these days, hopefully very soon, I'm going to write it up and have it out on blog. And just like, okay, here are the pieces that are needed. But it's, these 7 are essential to have, and most organizations are missing these, and being able to go through at least the initial thinking, if not integration and monitoring and maintenance throughout. So now I'm going to take a quick look at 3 of the 60+ social lenses. And it's essentially there to help understand sort of the capability and functionality, and help be able to see into the future a little bit so we can make smart decisions today as to what we'll be getting. And the first one of these is social progressions, or social progressions with FHIR. And there's a handful of services that have these now. Some of it came from having this presentation and talking about, or this section of the presentation and talking to vendors and saying, hey, here's how things should work. Here's a lightweight, high-level metaphor and lens to think about things. And they're like, can you please write this up, because we want to hand this to our customers. We want to build this, but we need our customers asking for it before we can build it. So essentially, we start out with a Spark. Yes?
Excuse me, can we hold the questions to the end, please? That's what
I
he,
don't understand what he's saying, so we keep following along. Just to clarify terms, please. You said customers, who are you thinking of as customer? Other agencies, the public?
These are customers who are buying the platforms, buying social platforms
Okay.
from the vendors.
So not government vendors to AT&T.
It could be government vendors. It's the people who are making the software. And so I've worked on inside government. I've worked for a large business. There's almost no difference between the two. It's just a scale. And they both think the other don't know what's going on and have no value for the other. And they're talking about the exact same things. So the customer is who's buying, the customer is who's buying it. The vendor is the people who are making it, not the integrators. Government has somebody in the middle. Large business often has somebody in the middle as well. So you start off with a Spark, and the Spark is essentially something like a tweet, something lightweight that's in a stream. There's these ideas that are flowing through. You can have 6 people that have noticed a problem and a solution one morning, and you're just like, hey, this problem that we've been having for quite a while, it looks like we have a potential solution. 6 people have tweeted about it. You're like, hey, can we get some more information on this? So you take those 6 people, you take their tweets or their items from their stream, move it into essentially a campfire or a small space where they're essentially doing brainstorming and just dumping and being able to say, here's related information, here's the background on this, here's potential solution, here's how to find out more. And so they're working through it. And one of the questions with the campfire, and it's a collective exercise, is essentially, is there anything here? And if there is something there, then you want to get it out to more people. If not, you may say, yeah, let's hold on to this for a while. Let's just archive it or just keep it here and not have it active. But quite often you'll say, yeah, there's a solution here. Let's check with more people in the organization. So turn the campfire into a bonfire. More people are able to sit around it, provide feedback and say, yeah, this will work. Legal's looking at it and going, yeah, this looks like a good solution. There's 2 questions that we need to have answered. If we can do that, we've got the green light. People who are looking at it and going, yeah, we need to do this with it. The people who are going to implement it are going, yeah, we need to work with these 2 states to get approval because they have their own regulations around it. So you need to start bringing those pieces together. And the bonfire allows you to figure out if there's something there, be able to get more feedback, and you're working essentially between bonfire and a campfire. And what you're ultimately trying to get to is a final result, which is a torch. And which is safe, reliable, repeatable. It's easy to hand off to others. It's a final product. And the thing that's important through these 4 different progressions is that they're all integrated and seamless. Most often we have 4 distinct different services. And it wasn't until about 5 or 6 years ago that there was 4 companies that picked this up and said, yeah, we're going to take our internal activity stream and internal tweets, marrying it and be able to drop it into a wiki, drop it into a document, have live interaction around it, being able to take that, change the privacy from a closed group and turning it into an open group, and being able to get feedback from more people, and then being able to work back and forth to get to a final output. And it started really changing how things are doing. And one of those platform companies came to me about a year ago, and they're like, do you know that more than 40% of our install base is using the campfire? And that's where they start with things. They have an idea, let's take it to a private group, and they bring in interested parties. And they're like, about 80% of those things go out, 20% of them just sit or get deleted. And they're like, yeah, there's nothing really here. They'll write it up, yeah, we looked at this, nothing really here, we're moving on. And so it becomes really valuable to have that background information, being able to move it between the different scales and the different feedback levels. So the next social lens is something that's very similar to that, but gets it much more closer to the actual tool types and the social interaction design that's needed for those pieces. And it's looking at the differing perspectives. I took my last semester of undergrad in England, outside of London, and every week I'd go into London and go to museums. Was at a Center for Medieval and Renaissance Studies, and so I had to go look at artwork. And an awful lot of what I needed to look at was in London. So I'd catch the bus down to London, spend the day, go back. And one of the things, going back about 15 years or 20 years later, for a conference and for some work in London, I realized I'd never seen the Thames. And so I was taking a walk down the Thames and ran across the Millennium Bridge. I'm like, wow, this is really gorgeous. And as I walked underneath, there was a lot of art students on the far side who were drawing the same bridge. And I was looking to see what each of them were drawing, and each of them were focusing on different pieces and perspectives of the bridge. And the very last artist was sketching out something that was close to what of the photo I had taken on the other side, but a little bit shorter. And so we sort of need to have that differing perspective and understanding all the different pieces so that we can see the whole much better. So the first with social, and one that's quite often missed, is the personal. One of the things that's incredibly valuable to have is a personal interface for these services, so that you can check to see, who are the last people that I communicated with, what projects are going on, what's coming up on my various projects and product releases, what interest groups am I following, as they relate to different things, and what do I need to look at today, what's coming up this week. Maybe we need to get this one project going and to spin up the next version of it. And that becomes really important, and a lot of tools just are missing that personal perspective and that dashboard for individuals. So the first one of the social and people interacting with people is the collective, where you have a social object, can be an idea, could be a document, could be something that's out there. Everybody is providing their perspective. They're not necessarily paying attention to each other, but it's sort of a brain dump. Could be competitive analysis, getting a full brainstorm of everything that's out there and different perspectives of it. Being able to store it and then being able to turn it over to have other people look at it and or curate it. But having breadth and completeness is one of the things that's really helpful. So we've got the collective. The next is a stack of team, group, community, and network, which is completely different social interaction patterns, because you have people looking at the social object, they're sharing things about it, but they're paying attention to what others are doing. They're commenting on each other's, what each other is sharing, they're curating it a little bit, and each of the different scales of these has different social interaction patterns as well. The teams are looking to heavily coordinate information. They each have their piece. They need to be able to figure out where they fit in. They're like, oh, it looks like the visual comps are about to be done. I need to start spinning up how to do the front end coding for this and being able to connect to the back end developers. And so the team perspective is working on that coordination piece. The group is a little bit higher level, and it's people sharing information. And then the community could be an operating administration, could be a department itself, and the network could be something that's much wider. And at the different scales, you have different things that you need to worry about, think about, and different social interaction design patterns as well. And the last of these is the collaboration, or Denning and Yarnovsky frame it as real collaboration, where you have one social object that you're looking at. You can have one white paper, one approach, and you have all the people who are working together. They're not just coordinating, they're having to negotiate and mitigate the different ideas, the different approaches, get down to one approach. And the thing that's most important is capturing the decision points. And if you've got, as I'd mentioned before, you have 5 different ways to take something forward. You're choosing C. Well, why did you choose C? Why not A? They're like, A doesn't look like it's going to work for this reason. And being able to flag that a decision's been made about a certain aspect, so you can come back to it later, look at B, why doesn't it work? You're choosing C, and being able to capture sort of the realities of how we do work. And sometimes it's handshakes, or it's like, I have no idea. And I'm like, the person that I sit next to thinks that C is a really good idea, and they have good reasons. I'm like, well, next week, I think the thing that we're working on, I think B is a really good idea. I'll vote for C for you because you think it's a good idea, and you don't have understanding for next week. And be able to capture those realities of how things are chosen. It's not based on data. It's not based on qualitative understanding. It's based on, I have no idea. I'm going with somebody who I think has a good idea, and I'm doing what they do. And that's really important to capture and to be fine with that understanding. So having the collaborative, and an awful lot of organizations are looking for this, or they're buying things that are named collaborative, and what they're really looking for are the team, group, and community stacks, and those social interaction patterns. But as we're working across these different pieces, we essentially have another understanding on an access to it that is essentially framed as walled gardens versus open sharing. And so how open are things? Are we working with everything open all the time? And for Westerners, which is Those of us in North America and Western Europe, we're not really comfortable as a whole on sharing things openly all the time. So when you start looking at closed platforms and platforms that come with groups as a default closed and locked, and you invite people into those closed groups, platforms that are closed groups tend to have much higher adoption rates. You'll get to 30% adoption to 40% adoption over 6 months. The downside is that they're not searchable. That knowledge is completely lost. The people don't want to repeat it again. An awful lot of organizations that I talk to, they've got a closed platform and they're trying to figure out how to make it open and not alienate everybody. The other side of it is the open sharing. And what we have with open sharing is fully open platforms where everybody can see everything that's going on, but there's a lack of social comfort with it. People just aren't that comfortable. And so over 6 months, 5% to 10% of people interacting with those systems tends to be the norm. But what we end up really needing is essentially comfortable spaces with permeable walls, a place where we can go from that campfire, a comfortable space, to a more bonfire with open sharing. Work with your peers, work with the people that you know what their feedback's going to be, vet it, and make sure that you're not making a mistake and making fools of yourself, and then being able to share it out more openly and just change the permission on and say, yeah, let's put this out for others. Which, going back to the 1970s, Donald Appleyard was a professor at Berkeley looking at livable streets. What made streets comfortable for people to have their kids out playing in the street? What made for comfortable social spaces? And it was essentially having secure homes and streets to get back and forth. But what made it secure was the space in a transition area between the street and sidewalk and the front door. It could be steps in the porch, it could be a front yard, and it could be one of the things that also helped was having people put something in the front window or on their front yard or front stoop that told a little bit about them. It could be a flag, it could be a photo, it could be something you could see through the front window, but it gave you an idea of who your neighbors were and what they were working on. So within that closed wall and the comfortable spaces, being able to put things out that you're working on helps people say, oh, I know what this group's working on, I know what that group's working on. We have these livable streets or these livable digital environments where work is getting done. And you're able to say, oh, these people are working on this. Hey, we're working on something similar. How do we communicate and collaborate on this? And that becomes incredibly important. And for those of us of a Western perspective, North American and Western Europe, it's important to be able to understand that we're not openly social as a norm, and being able to say, yeah, we get that. We would like to be able to have the benefits of being openly social, but we're not quite there. How do we take that next step to be able to move forward into that so we can take the benefits of each? The next and the last of the three is the 4 rings of enterprise social tools. And it's 4 rings that I look at and use to gauge sort of how large the rings are, look at the overlapping and the benefits that we get from them. And the first of these is tools. And so the tools are the features and functionality of what we're working with, pretty straightforward. The next is the essentially UX. It's the interface and the ease of use. And when we do these well, that frames what the capabilities are of the tools. We've been doing this rather well. We've been doing this piece the last 5 years to 8 years much better than we had the prior, which that really wasn't there. That was a very small circle or very small ring for many years. And many tools are still very difficult to use, but we're getting better at that piece. But this has been the sort of basis of enterprise and business tools for the last 20 to 30 years. We get this. This is something we're familiar with. But we start adding in sociality and the complexities of humans interacting with humans, and it starts changing things. It gets much more difficult, which is why we have the more roles to be able to work with it. But if we get the sociality and we get the social comfort and people comfortable sharing, one of the gains that we get is more intelligence is shared and more knowledge is shared, and the business needs are met. We're able to work together distributedly, much more efficiently. We're able to search, connect things together in a way that we haven't before, and we get a great benefit from it. The last one of these, which helps an awful lot, is encouraging use, which is having a community manager, is having very small helps, small videos that say, hey, here's how to get started. Here's how to do this piece. Here's how to do this piece. Small chunks that make it very easy to use and easy to hand off and easy to understand when you get stuck. And so making it easy to understand and interact with starts fleshing all of these out. And what we get is social comfort when we've got the encouraging use overlapped with sociality. And what we get with the interface with the UX and encouraging use is expanded use, because it's much easier to use. We have the mental models to understand what's going on, and we also get increased ROI, the return for investment. And what all of this gets is social software perfection. Bang. But quite often these circles are not fully fleshed out. Some are smaller and larger than others. And so when you start looking at the gaps, and if I have tools, UX, and encouraging use, what are the things that are strong, and what does it look like if I have those strong? And what are the deficiencies? What's missing? What's not working properly? And it's like, oh, we need to look at the sociality. We don't have the interactions. We don't have the handoffs. We don't have that social comfort. And just being able to walk through those 4 different pieces to figure out sort of what's wrong, what's missing, to be able to see better. One of the things we need to understand is there's going to be problems. And most people think, oh, social software is easy. Everybody's using Twitter. Everybody's using Facebook. We'll just put this thing out there and it's going to go. So internally, one of the big problems that we have to think about early on is services go away. This building used to do something different. Now it just overlooks a parking lot. So we have to start thinking about redundancy, being able to have a system that does one thing, but able to have something that backs it up with similar functionality. Quite often having those running at the same time is incredibly helpful. And so if one goes away, or somebody says, yeah, we've got 3 weeks before we get shut down by bankruptcy, other things along those lines, as much due diligence as we do, things go away, and sometimes insanely quickly. So working on redundancy plans is incredibly important. Also failover, when something goes down for 6 hours, what's the failover so we can still get work done? If all of our work is in one platform, what's the failover patterns? How do we get things done? How do we think about this stuff early enough? And lastly, understand that constant change is the norm. A lot of people talk about disruption. With an awful lot of these things, disruption is the wrong framework to think about it. Think about constant change as the norm, and figure out what you need to do to make that constant change not disruptive, but be able to work with it in a flow and not be bothered by it. So the things that we need to plan for are the obvious: security, and security with social platforms. Who can see what, making sure that the wrong people are not getting access to it. Being able to understand the privacy and permissions, and particularly as things start scaling, the privacy and permissions starts getting much more difficult. Some tools make it much easier to deal with the privacy and permissions, others not so much. But also understand that when you've got 50 people using a platform, 400 people using a platform, and 3,000 people to 30,000, it's going to be very different things. Things are going to work drastically differently, because you're running into the every now as well as other components as well. Also, one of the realities that an awful lot of people don't understand is one size does not fit all. There are many pieces in one system. A lot of vendors are selling one size fit all system. And when you talk to organizations that are using platforms, they're using 2 or 3, 4 platforms. And because you've got different divisions and groups using different pieces, you have features and functionality in one piece that are needed. And so we have to think about using many pieces in one system as the norm, which gets us to thinking about integration as a core concept. How easy is it going to be to integrate things? And it's one of the things that Slack does insanely well, is that it's a great integration platform. And being able to have visibility in a lot of different services, and have that surface up into the front, not having to switch different things. Being able to look at an umbrella service, one service that connects to all the others. It becomes your one-stop shop. It's where you have that personal interface and dashboard. What's going on with my different groups across the different systems? Where do I need to be paying attention? Where was I paying attention? What were my to-dos? What do we need to follow up on? And last, once again, the community manager is incredibly important. And having somebody who's overseeing everything, who's monitoring, keeping metrics, seeing how things are growing, but also looking at problem areas. And lastly, as we're looking forward, the things that we need to do is to have tool selection and review on a regular basis. Essentially, Nothing longer than 6-month tool reviews. I know some organizations that have it quarterly, being able to say, what's going on with us now? What are the things that are going to bite us in the next 3 months or 6 months? Looking at all the tools that you have, is this about to go away? Is our backup or our redundant solution, is that about to go away? Is that serving us well? Are there features and functionality that we have in one system that's not captured elsewhere for redundancy and failover? Also, the stability and long-term assessments, being able to say, how stable is this? And we're thinking about scaling. We've gone from 50 people to 250 people in the last 6 months. Are these the right tools? Are these going to get us to 1,000? What does it look like in 2 years? What does it look like in 3 years? Using the 4 rings of enterprise social software success and looking at the engagement, looking at the sociality as well as features and functionality. How full are those rings? How well do they overlap? That becomes really important, being able to do rough projections over 2 or 3 years. And lastly, doing continual vendor assessments, not only for the tools that you're using, whether they're open source or have actual vendors, but looking at what other people are doing and planning. It could be that your redundancy framework can be replaced with something else. And so that becomes quite helpful. And so the last piece is a high-level mind map that I had done for a CMS Wire article that I'd done about a month or 2 ago. And framing out, there's a PDF that's had, which will make it much easier to look at. So the IT focusing on it. Most organizations only have IT looking at it. Then looking at the integration and deployment needs with the collaboration Moneyball approach. And then looking at what employees need with a workflow match, mental model match, ease of use, functional needs, organizational management with budget to buy it. And then the common focus, small targeted apps and other pieces. And then looking at boundary crossing for connecting with customers, connecting with trusted partners, and secure connections. Then the types of interactions, which were the perspectives of the collective, the team, group, stack, real collaboration, the importance of integration, and then the way that I broke down the tools was slightly different this time. And I've got a lot of different approaches, but I was taking a look at it from pace and scale with synchronous high velocity and high volume for messaging as soon as possible communications, alert and status. Another short-term view is the asynchronous with forums, discussion platforms, team group status, planning, considered decisions, and then moving down to a longer view with archives and full archives, and whether it's in-house or whether it's cloud, and then breaking down to search for full search, and then search within context. And the last piece of it is being able to filter the short-term, the long-term. So it's paying attention to things that you have an interest in, and being able to alert you without you having to go look for them. So things with apps with agencies or bots with agencies, or agency, to be able to go out and bring those things near within reach so you're not having to look for them and save time. And then being able to filter related events, things that are not needed, things that are needed, and bring them much closer. And thank you. Yeah, I do.
And since we have some live streaming audience, if you could raise your hand, and I'll bring the microphone over to you.
Could you identify yourself?
Sure. I'm Nick. I'm at 18.
No, that was my question. What's your name?
My name is Nick Redhauer. Any questions or comments?
You're
welcome. Thank you.
I was looking at your infographic being referenced.
Oh, great. Great. Can you use the microphone, please?
CMS Wire is at CMS Wire. So if you search for Thomas Vander Wal, it's one of 2 articles I have at CMS Wire. And there's also a PDF of this presentation in high resolution. You're welcome. Yes.
Yeah, I'm Dan Jadarsky. I'm with Big Sky Associates. We support a lot of DoD clients, but So we're on Slack, and it's a really good platform. I think the feedback that we always get, or the thing that we don't have a solution for yet, is the people that are used to older methods, email and phone and stuff, they always come back with information overload. You know, what do we do? There's too much information here. How do I process it? And you know, it's not a very constructive comment to get from them, because we haven't really figured out what the real issue there is, or what, if anything, we can do about it. So do you have any thoughts on that?
There's a few. Part of it is having, you know, sort of marry social scientists along with sort of UX researchers and figure out sort of what the real problems are with the scaling and the information overload. And likely it's going to be down in the filtering and being able to have continual search down in the lower left-hand corner for what are the things important for me. You know, email is increasingly turning into sort of the interface for activity streams. So the things where, you know, that person's name is mentioned or something that they're following, that becomes an email with all the pieces to have a link back into the service. And, you know, getting people to move from the email to respond, to click the link and to go back into the tool is sometimes the larger hurdle. But it's, you know, figuring out what they need and what interface information they need. You know, what are the can't miss things? What are the things that I should see? What are the things that, you know, are good to see? And then what are the things, you know, please, unless somebody, you know, brings this to me, I don't really need to see it. And start thinking about filtering in those ways. And one of the guys that I know, Ben Brown, just wrote, it was a piece on Medium as Slack and messaging is the new OS. And everybody's writing applications for it. And I know 3 or 4 companies right now who are building apps, and their whole business right now is building apps for Slack, and on top of Slack for filtering, for scheduling, for decision-making, all sorts of different things. And so it's just, some of those solutions could be coming, but identifying what they are, but being able to walk through and frame the problems with the people who are saying this is information overload. And working with them to help figure out what the filters are they need to not do that, but to make sure that everything they must have, they do see. And we as humans are great at creating information overload. We've been doing it for about, you know, a few centuries. And we create information overload, and then we create a system to square that back. And then we create information overload and figure out how to reel it back in to, you know, keep us more sane. And we're very, very quickly cycling through many of those right now.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Nick, we have a question from Twitter.
Hello, Twitter. Yeah.
You want to read it, Ori?
I will. So Terry Kelly asks, what initial steps can very large and complex organizations take to design internal collaboration tools that will meet the needs of the other 90%?
Probably the first step is I've got like half-day workshops that go through about 11 or 12 of the lenses, which have things, it takes sort of the unknowable, the difficult to see, and makes them sort of aha moments or no duh moments. You're like, oh, yeah, of course. And, you know, I'll do workshops with 20 people in a room, and they all have the aha, no duh, and they all have a different idea of what that no duh is because they have an understanding of the organization. And so one of the reasons why social scientists are helpful is that large, complex organizations have many different cultures and subcultures within them, and different personality types attracted to different types of jobs, and it becomes a very complex situation of having sort of one size fit all. So being able to understand the lay of the land becomes really helpful, and then being able to understand the different social perspectives that are needed. Is it a collective tool? Is it the tool group stack that's needed? Are they looking to do real collaboration and capturing decision points and so forth? But sitting down and understanding the full spectrum of things is incredibly helpful. and then start walking through the tool selection. There's two good analysts. The Real Story Group is really good at monitoring what the current state of tools are and features and functionality, and I've been using them to map back to social lenses. So they're identifying sort of what the needs, problem sets, and gaps are in an organization, and where to put something in, or a tool type, and then using something like Real Story Group or Aragon Research is another one, Jim Lundy. They've lived out in the world, have been burned by not asking the right questions, and so they capture all the different tool pieces and other things that an awful lot of other analysts are just talking about the superficial, and they tend to get under the hood and go, yeah, if you got this problem, this is not the tool for you, this is for something else, but you have to understand your pain points and your needs first.
Nick, I think behind you.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Pavni. I'm with John Snow, and one of the projects that we're working on right now is AIDS.gov. And AIDS.gov is redesigning their website, where they're bringing together their current blog site and their current website, just as a way of kind of condensing content for the consumer.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, in terms of very high level sort of advice, if you had something to share for two fairly well established content platforms that are coming together. So, thanks.
The big thing is to be able to understand where the content came from, and someone to understand that it came from, possibly more peer-reviewed and edited perspective, and as well as blog, but bringing them together and having sort of a common categories, common tagging, common keywords across them for finding and interlinking and repointing. And saying, if you find this blog post really helpful, here are the other pieces that could be blog posts or others, but still holding on to where they came from, because sometimes that will make a difference to people. And they're like, oh, it's a blog post, it may not be as full, and someone's like, look for the blog post to point me to full articles and something a little bit more formal. So being able to have those pointers and understanding the domain that they came from. Those are like the high level things to do, and then interlinking them as much as possible. Anything else? Bueller?
All right. Any other questions? Let's end the conversation.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.